screen right now, so let's start. So आज हम लेक्चर नंबर 17 करने वाले हैं, ठीक है। इसमें ऑब्जेक्ट ओरिएंटेड प्रोग्रामिंग थी एंड क्लासेस थे जो कि मैंने कंप्लीट कर लिया है। अभी मैं इनहेरिटेंस कर रहा हूँ, ओके। एंड इसके बाद लास्ट 18 बचेगा जिसमें तीन सेक्शंस हैं, बैकएंड, प्रॉमिस एंड फेच एंड लास्ट सिंक। सो या आज हम
We're going to learn an important
ट्राई करेंगे फिनिश करने का। सो लेट्स सी।
feature of object-oriented programming called inheritance. Inheritance lets us reuse code between classes. So first, let's learn the concept of inheritance. To do that, we're going to open our project. So we'll open this page here to our checkout page, and we're going to go to the home page by clicking the top left. And on this page, we have a bunch of products. But you also notice that we have different types of products. For example, we have clothing like this t-shirt, and we have appliances like this toaster. So clothing and appliances are still products. They have a name, a price, and a rating, but they are a more specific type of product. For example, clothing can have all the properties of a regular product, but it can also have specific properties like a size chart. So how do we represent this kind of relationship in our code? We have a product, and then we have a more specific type of product. One way to represent this is to create a new class called clothing. And this class will have all the properties of a regular product, but also more specific properties. However, there's a problem with this, which is we're duplicating a lot of code. Instead, object-oriented programming has a feature called inheritance that allows one class to get all the properties and methods from another class, so we don't have to copy-paste this code. For example, we can make a clothing class and then use inheritance to get all the properties and methods from the product class. This is similar to how a child inherits things from their parents, like their hair color or the shape of their eyes. In fact, we call the product class the parent class, and we call the clothing class the child class. So now let's learn how to use inheritance in our code. We're going to open VS Code and open our code on the left, and then open products.js. And we're going to scroll to the product class. And then below this class, we're going to create a more specific type of product called class and capital C clothing and curly brackets. So we said that clothing is just a specific type of product. So that means clothing should have all the properties and methods of a product. So first, let's inherit all these properties and methods into the clothing class. To use inheritance, after the class name, we're going to use the word extends. And then we're going to give it the class that we want to inherit from, which is the product class above. So this means that clothing will get all the properties and methods of this class, or it will inherit all the properties and methods. To demonstrate this, let's leave this empty and create a new clothing object. So down here, let's create a variable first using const, and we'll name it a t-shirt. Make it equal, and we'll generate a new clothing object. To do that, we'll use the word new, capital C clothing, and brackets.
तो
And
अगर
next, we're going to expand the product
हम ऐसा करते हैं तो क्या प्रोडक्ट के सारे जो डाटा वेरिएबल्स हो इसके अंदर आ जाएंगे? लेट्स सी।
array, and we're going to give the product details to this class. So we're going to scroll down to the third product, which is the t-shirt. And we're going to select this object and then right click, copy, and scroll up. And now between these brackets, we're going to right click and paste. So now we created a new clothing class. We gave it all the data that it needs. And let's console.log it.
यहाँ पे तो पूरी की पूरी वैल्यू ही दे दी तो फिर वो फैच ही नहीं करेगा आई मीन कोई डाटा बेसिकली यहाँ पे ये रहता है ना कि अगर वो एम्प्टी है तो वो ट्राई करेगा कि जिससे हम मंगा रहे हैं आई मीन जिससे हम वैल्यू कॉपी कर रहे हैं या जिससे हम एक्सटेंड कर रहे हैं उसकी कॉपी करे वो वैल्यू बट अगर हम ऑलरेडी उसको प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं तो फिर उसके पास सारी चीज़ें हैं
To see what it looks like. So down here, we're going to console.log brackets and the variable name, which is t-shirt. So here, t-shirt, and save. And now let's open the console. So we'll open our web page, and then on this page, we're going to right click, inspect, and open the console. And you'll see that we created a new clothing object. And if we open it, you'll see that this has the same properties as the product class. So this inherited all the properties from product. So let's see if we inherited the methods as well. We'll go to our code, and let's try the method getPrice. So we'll console.log t-shirt.getPrice and brackets and save. And now if we open the console again, you'll see that getPrice also works. So clothing inherited the methods from product as well. So even though this is empty, this class gets or inherits all the properties and methods of product. So we use inheritance when we have one class, which is a more specific type of another class. For example, clothing is a more specific type of product. We want all the properties and methods of the product still, but we just don't want to copy paste all this code down here. So inheritance lets us reuse code between classes. So now that we have this clothing class, we can add properties and methods that are more specific to clothing. For example, clothing can have a size chart. So for convenience, inside this t-shirt object, I've actually added a size chart link. So let's add this to our clothing class. So up here, we're going to add a property, size chart link. And now to set this value, we're going to use the constructor like we did before. So down here, we're going to use a constructor, brackets and curly brackets. And we're going to give this a parameter called product details. So when we create the clothing,
एंड बेसिकली हम कंस्ट्रक्टर में जो है न्यू डिटेल्स देंगे है ना जिसमें होगा आई गेस साइड चार्ट लिंक ऑब्वियस बात है क्योंकि हमने वो क्रिएट किया है
we save this object into product details, and then we can use it to set the properties up here.
बट कंस्ट्रक्टर बेसिकली ये करता है कि जो वैल्यूज हम उस टाइम प्रोवाइड करते हैं वही वैल्यू को रखता है तो ये जो है वो प्रीवियस वैल्यू फिर वो यूज़ नहीं करेगा प्रीवियस वैल्यू फिर वो हो जाएंगी गायब सी हो जाएंगी राइट ये नहीं
So we're going to do this dot size chart link and make it equal to the product details, which is this object, and we're going to get the size chart link property. Dot size chart link. Now, one problem we have here is that clothing inherits all the properties from the product. So we also need to set the ID, the image, the name, and so on. So if we scroll down, we could do something like this.id equals productDetails.id. However, instead of doing this one by one all over again, inheritance gives us a shortcut. We can actually just use the constructor in the parent class up here.
super.
So to call the parents constructor, we're going to use a special feature of classes called super
Yes.
and brackets. So super basically calls the constructor of the parent class, which is the product. So this will call the constructor up here. And we also need to give this the product details. So down here, we're going to call super and give it the product details. So this will call the constructor of the parent class, which is product, and that will set the ID, the name, and the rating. So now let's save this and check.
Okay, let's do this. So हमें जाना है प्रोडक्ट में एंड बेसिकली यहाँ पे चेंजेस करने हैं ना. Yep. ये रहा हमारा आई मीन मेन क्लास. हमें एक और क्लास बनाना जो कि इसका इनहेरिटेंस है ना. So let's do this class. इसका नाम रखेंगे clothing products clothing या clothing yeah clothing extends करना है product का and this is our class. Okay, so हमें इसके अंदर जो हमारे पास एक प्रोडक्ट है. लेट्स सी. आई नो कुछ ज़्यादा ही बड़ा है बट ये रहा हमारा थर्ड प्रोडक्ट जहाँ पे हमारे पास है साइज चार्ट लिंक. सो बेसिकली ये चाहिए हमें. वापस से इसको कर दो. ओके, सो लेट्स क्रिएट दिस. ओके, एंड वी नीड अ कंस्ट्रक्टर जो कि बेसिकली सेट करेगा. तो हमें सेट करना है दिस साइज चार्ट लिंक इक्वल. हम इसको दे देते हैं product details and यहाँ जगह product details dot site chart link. And before that we need to use super and super में हमें provide करना पड़ेगा product details. So that's basically, for example, let's see. Okay, let's create and check है ना. and यहाँ पे देते हैं product details. देना जरूरी है वैसे तो, नहीं भी देंगे तो चल जाएगी. and basically console.log में टी शर्ट का नेम करते हैं क्योंकि नेम इजीली आ जाएगी. So let's try it. Okay, things have gone bad. Why? Candidate for is of undefined trading ID. New product. Okay, तो ये ID मांग रहा है. इसको रियली में ID चाहिए. Okay bro, take it. Now happy. Okay, happy. आ गया name जो कि ये है. Okay, so let's comment this out first. Okay,
check our console again, and open up the clothing object, and you'll see that now we have a size chart link property.
हाँ वो होगा.
So that's how inheritance works. A class can get or inherit all the properties and methods of another class and reuse that code. And this class can also have more specific properties and methods, like a size chart link. One last thing to know is that if we don't create a constructor, by default, it will run the parent's constructor. So that's why when this class was empty, the code still worked.
Okay, okay.
Now that we have this clothing class, we're going to use it in our project. So right now, if we scroll down to our products array, we converted all of these into a product class. However, we're going to convert some of them, like the t-shirt, into a clothing class instead to make it more specific. So how do we know which objects to convert into a product and which ones to convert into clothing? To help us do that, I included a property called type. So type tells us which class we should use when we're converting this into a class. This is sometimes called a discriminator property. It tells us which class we should convert this to. So we're going to go down to the bottom of this code. So I'm going to do a trick here where I'm going to scroll up to the products array and click this arrow to collapse it. And then at the bottom, we're going to use that type property to decide which class to use. So inside this function, we're going to use an if statement, brackets and curly brackets. And inside, we're going to check the type property, product details dot type. And we'll check if it is equal to the string clothing. If it is equal to clothing, we're going to convert this object into a clothing class instead. So let's return
इसलिए हम यहाँ पे return clothes कर देंगे in
new
comparison product.
capital C clothing and brackets. And we're going to give the constructor product details. So now our array will contain a mix of regular products and clothing. Next, for each of our clothing, we're going to display the size chart link on the page. But first, let's make sure that we have this image here, the clothing size chart. So if we go into our images folder, you might see the image here called clothing size chart.png, but currently I don't have this, so I need to download this first. To do that, we're going to click this link.
Okay, let's do this also. इसको हटा देता हूँ क्योंकि अब यूज़ नहीं है इसका आई गेस. बेसिकली हमें यहाँ पे चेक करना है कि अगर हमारा जो प्रोडक्ट है ना,